Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
FISA fails. Welcome to the Thursday edition as the House fails to pass an extension of the warrantless spy powers before they expire tomorrow. The opposition was bipartisan. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. And Kailey, this is the first time ever that FISA 702 would go dark, and it has everything to do with a man named Bill Pulte.
Yep, the acting director of national intelligence, who President Trump at this time seems to insist will be serving in that acting capacity until a permanent replacement is made. That is a non-starter for Democrats who are not willing to reauthorize these spy powers so long as that remains the case. So yes, it looks like they will be dark, and potentially dark for some period of time, as the House is leaving town for more than a week. And the question is going to be, to what extent can the president fill some intelligence gaps here via executive authority?
Going home, despite some calls for them to stay the weekend and potentially work this out, but I'm not sure anything would change, with Pulte set to start work on June 19th, as the president said yesterday. This was a bipartisan vote, Kailey. 19 Republicans, 19 voting with almost all Democrats to say no.
Yeah, so this wasn't just a one-party issue. And of course, it comes at a time where we're also watching for more potential U.S. action against Iran. The president is promising a third day now of strikes against Iran and suggesting we could be going in to seize Kharg Island in the not-so-distant future.
We've got some great voices to share with you coming up this hour. In fact, Kailey just returned from Capitol Hill a short time ago to interview Senator Todd Young, the Republican, and we'll have a Democrat weighing in as well in just a moment, and Congressman Greg Landsman from Ohio. Slightly different views on how this war is unfolding.
Yep, and we'll get to those conversations in just a moment. But first, let's get a check on these markets as we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kailey, and happy Thursday. Stocks higher across the board. We got oil advancing. Do want to begin with the development in SpaceX. Retail investors have submitted more than $100 billion in orders for shares in SpaceX's IPO. Here's where we stand in terms of equity markets. We're off session highs, off session lows, up 15 now. 72.82 on the S&P 500 index. That is a gain midday of 0.2%. Dow Industrials holding above 50K, up 286 now, up 0.6%. NASDAQ up 0.4%. NASDAQ 100 index outperforming, up 0.9%. All of this with the SOX advancing 3.1%. The VIX just above 21, the 10-year at 4.52%. Your 2-year, 4.14%. The 30-year holding above 5%, 5.00%. We've got spot gold higher by $8 the ounce. We'll call that little change at $4,080 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.8%, 90.77 a barrel, and Brent 93.38 up by about 0.3%. After earnings last night, Oracle shares are plunging. They are down 12.4%. The company reported quarterly capital expenses that were higher than estimates. Again, recapping here, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all advancing, holding on to gains. The SOX up 3.1%, the VIX above 21, and West Texas Intermediate crude 90.78 a barrel, up 0.8%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. We appreciate it. As always, Charlie, keeping us up to date on the markets. And as we try to keep you up to date on the situation here in Washington, well, it's not necessarily a good one if you're someone who is hoping to see an extension of key government warrantless surveillance powers beyond the deadline of midnight tomorrow. It does look indeed like FISA's Section 702 powers will go dark post that deadline after the House failed to pass a short-term extension of them. And as Joe has pointed out, this was a bipartisan failure. 19 Republicans voted not to extend these powers alongside a far greater number of Democrats.
Almost all of them. 218 to 198 was the vote. This would have required a two-thirds majority because of the procedure that the speaker was using to get this done. And as you just mentioned, Kailey, it looks like everyone's going home. Nicole Malliotakis, the congresswoman from New York, suggested yesterday that people stay in town to hammer this out. But as long as Bill Pulte is starting the job as DNI on June 19th, as the president has said, I'm not sure anything would change anyway.
Yeah, so let's go live to the Hill now to talk about that,
By all means. Greg Landsman, as we mentioned, Democrat from Ohio's 1st District, joins us live from Capitol Hill following the failure of this extension. Congressman, it's great to have you with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Was this the right move right now to see FISA expire for the first time ever?
Oh, no. I mean, we should have passed FISA months ago. You know, there have been several attempts. I voted to extend FISA, and all it required was some reforms that were pretty straightforward, which they didn't want to pursue, and we still, pushed forward because it's such an important national security tool. And then Bill Pulte comes along and reaffirms that they're not serious about using this tool responsibly. This is a guy who is known for going after Trump's political enemies as opposed to doing any actual, serious work, certainly not national security related serious work. And so you saw Democrats and Republicans say, no, you gotta be more serious. We're talking about national security and intelligence collection.
So if the president were to name someone else to serve in that role on a permanent basis between now and June 19th, when Bill Pulte was supposed to take over, would you fly back to Washington and vote to extend FISA? Should the House be called back from recess if the opportunity arises?
Yeah, and I suspect others would too. I'm not sure they get to the majorities they need. There should be reforms, but yeah, I suspect that if the administration did what most presidents do, which is to work with the United States Congress and say, hey, I want to get this done. This is incredibly important to our national security. I want to get everybody in a room. This would have gotten resolved months ago. Like so many problems, they just fail, to do anything other than, sort of have Trump sit in the Oval Office and do press conferences and talk about things, but almost no work. I mean, zero work.
Well, there's obviously a reason why you think it should be renewed. Section 702 informs more than half of the president's daily briefing. We know that it has helped to stop terror attacks against this country. And we also know that the World Cup is just about to begin. What do you think of this narrative that the country is less safe going into this weekend that kicks off 147 soccer games?
Yeah, I think it's true in the sense that between this failure of the administration to get FISA done and this congressional Republican majority to get it done, you also just have an FBI that's being run by Kash Patel, that's focused no longer on the priorities around law enforcement, but again, like Pulte, going after the president's political enemies. And so the concerns about our safety are very serious, and somebody has to step up and be the adult in the room. And Johnson could do it, Thune could do it, obviously Trump could, but until one of them steps up and says, "Hey, we're gonna do things a little bit differently," we're gonna see this kind of nonsense. I don't know what to say. It's a terrible thing. I do believe that the courts will step in and require some of this intelligence sharing to continue, but it makes the professionals who do this work, it makes their job so much harder.
Congressman, I'd also like to ask you about what we're hearing from the president now as to the way forward for the United States when it comes to the conflict with Iran. We've already seen strikes that the U.S. says it has conducted in self-defense for the last 2 days. The president is now promising today we'll bring a third round of strikes, and he's even suggesting we could go in and seize Kharg Island. Listen, if you will, sir, to what the president said in an interview on Fox earlier today.
Yeah, there will be more bombing tonight. It'll be bigger, more powerful. They're finished. But the papers, the media refuses to write it. They're finished. We can walk in there tomorrow. We could take soldiers. I don't want to have boots on the ground, but if I wanted to, we could put a small group of soldiers and take over the whole place. They're finished. And the media is crooked. They're just like our elections. The media is crooked.
So, Congressman, as he suggests he could put ground troops on Iranian soil, I know at the onset of this conflict, you actually did see justification for destroying some of Iran's military capacity. You suggested it would stop them from taking more lives. Should the U.S. be willing to risk the lives of service members on the ground in pursuit of that same aim?
No, the original mission was to destroy the weapons shield that was being built back up around the enrichment facilities so that, we or one of our allies could go get the enriched material. This thing got, taken, well beyond that. And a couple things seem clear at this point. One, he doesn't sound well, and I think that's going to be something that people talk about moving forward. It wasn't just that he, this report about his own health and all these specialists, but he just sounds not in good shape. The second thing is that he's not doing any of this with anyone, right? So there's no coalition in Congress, there's no coalition internationally, and that is a position of weakness. He's put us in a position of weakness. And then the third thing is that his communication abilities are profoundly, they're terrible. He's supposed to be this great communicator, and he's just all over the place, and it is such a reckless thing to do as Commander-in-Chief.
Interesting, Congressman. I was reading a story about you in the New Yorker that ran at the beginning of March, and the headline is "Why a Democratic Congressman is Supporting Trump's War with Iran." We were in a very different world at that point. I know you had a war powers resolution that would require the president after 30 days to get permission, and also would bar ground troops from being involved. But you talked about your hope that this would be a limited incursion and not a war. Do you regret a headline like that? Does that frame your view still at this point?
Well, I didn't frame my view at the time. I mean, I believe that the United States and the world must confront the issue of Iran. Like, we can't continue to ignore the regime and what it's trying to do in terms of nuclear weapon, but also just the amount of money they spend on the terror in the Middle East and what we've had to do and our allies have had to do to respond to Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis. I mean, it's just, it has to stop. Now, it does require taking action, though I believe you need a big-time leader who can rally the country and the Congress and the world, and Trump absolutely failed to do that.
Well, as we consider the president's decision-making here and how it may or may not align with the desire of Congress, it does seem we're starting to see more breaks, Congressman, with even Republicans on Capitol Hill not necessarily willing to go along with the desires of the White House. And I wonder if that's why you feel that time might be ripe for a massive piece of what you're describing as anti-corruption legislation. The Drain the Swamp Act seems to me, Congressman, like actually a series of other bills that are going to be packaged into one gigantic one that would even do things like enforce term limits on the Supreme Court. What's the real prospect of something like this getting through this Congress and this Washington?
Yeah, I mean, it's the most, comprehensive anti-corruption legislation I think ever, and it deals with the rampant, corruption. Even if it's perception, there's just an enormous amount of distrust. You got to fix a bunch of things at the White House, in the executive branch, in Congress, at the Supreme Court. And we wanted to give the American people in the United States Congress a comprehensive bill so that they can talk to their elected officials or people running for office and the next president of the United States to say, if you're going to run and you're going to ask for my vote, I want to know that you're going to actually drain the swamp. I want to know that you're going to vote for this Drain the Swamp bill. And so we wanted to make sure that that bill was there so that the American people could push for it. Odds are this Congress will have no interest in passing the Drain the Swamp Act, and unfortunately the president won't. But the next group, the next crew of leaders congressionally and folks at the White House hopefully will get an earful from the American people, and they will be convinced that part of getting elected means voting for this Drain the Swamp bill and ridding ourselves of this cancer of corruption that we've seen for years, if not decades.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Democratic Congressman Greg Landsman, representing Ohio's 1st District, live with us on Capitol Hill. Thank you so much. Now, that was the perspective of a Democrat in the House. We also, on Capitol Hill earlier today, got the perspective of a Republican in the Senate. Republican Senator Todd Young of Indiana joined me for a conversation earlier today where I talked to him not just about the escalating tension with Iran and conflict with Iran, but also what appears to be the looming expiration of FISA Section 702 surveillance powers. And he's not happy about it. Here's our conversation.
It's an uphill climb at this point. Members are flying home in the House of Representatives. They'd have to be called back in. But more importantly, to lay a predicate for that, Democrats would have to decide that they want to reauthorize this program. This is the program that informs most of the president's daily briefing. It gives us visibility into foreign terrorist activity and other threats to the American people and our friends. And as the World Cup descends on the United States, Mexico, and Canada, starting today, it's pretty concerning to me. It should be to all Americans that these authorities are lapsing.
Well, you say Democrats need to decide they want to extend it. I think many Democrats would tell you they would like to see this extended. Their issue is that the president will not pull back his tapping of Bill Pulte as acting director of national intelligence. Couldn't the president help lead a resolution here?
Well, I'm familiar with the argument. I've spoken to a number of my colleagues, many of whom I respect greatly, and I know are concerned about our national security. But my argument to them is, listen, this is a temporary appointment. Let's reauthorize this essential national security program as an act of pragmatism during an ideological and fractured time to protect the American people.
But
so
could it not
let's
also
be
pragmatic to just announce a different candidate for a permanent appointment now instead?
Well, I think we could do both. I think we can call on the White House to find someone suitable to Republicans and Democrats alike, someone who has, under the statute, the requisite experience. The statute calls for someone that has extensive national security and intelligence experience. I think we should follow the law. I think the American people agree. So I've carried that message. And so I think I have credibility to argue that the Democrats need to act. Their failure to act here and put a reauthorization on the president's desk is the only thing in front of them. They need to act responsibly.
Well, and you mentioned the World Cup kicking off today. I know you care a lot about that also as a former soccer player at Navy.
Yes.
When you consider the threat that may actually be posed to these major sporting events, is there anything in terms of executive order that the president could do to still make sure at least some authority with the aim of securing events such as the World Cup is still there?
So I'm also a member of the World Cup Steering Committee, and so I have a little visibility into this. And I have to say, almost all of the conversation surrounding the World Cup that emerges from the White House and the executive branch is focused on security. So I know they're pulling out every stop to ensure that the American people and others are safe. But there are some limitations to what they can do. They just will lack the visibility into the threats as they emerge and as they're executed, conceivably, in coming weeks, potentially coming months, if these 702 authorities aren't extended.
Well, and of course, the concern about this is heightened by the fact that we are still dealing with a conflict in the Middle East. Senator, the president has said we will be attacking Iran again today. This would be the third day in a row. He also suggested the U.S. could be taking Kharg Island in the near future. Is that an operation you would understand would require ground troops to be deployed? And if he's going to make that decision, does he need to ask you and your colleagues first?
Well, I'm glad that the president is applying more pressure to the Iranian regime. He has tested the regime and their appetite for conversation, negotiation, and ultimately resolution of this war. The president wants a quick resolution. He wants prices to go down. He wants Hormuz open. And he wants the uranium extracted from or otherwise secured in Iran. So all of those things can be accomplished, but unfortunately not until we apply more pressure on the Iranian leadership. So that's his objective with Kharg Island. With respect to congressional oversight, I have been incredibly critical of this institution for not exercising more oversight over a war power situation. I think it's created an environment in which Republicans and Democrats alike in recent history, whomever occupies the White House, feel comfortable going ahead and acting without consulting the American people. As we saw with the Iraq War, that creates all sorts of problems if members of Congress aren't asking the really hard questions early on in an exercise. So my hope would be, before any major commitment of American troops to this conflict, there would be not just consultation with Congress, but perhaps even a formal endorsement.
Well, and if it were put to you, would you be supportive?
Oh, I don't know details at this point. I don't know what the trade-offs would be. I don't know what the precise threat is, what the strategy is. They're really basic questions. You know, going into this effort, I would have asked questions maybe about the Strait of Hormuz, for example. Mm-hmm. So those are the types of basic questions that don't require even a classified setting, where you can stress test plans and you can get buy-in from the American people on the front end.
Do you believe at this time, based on your knowledge and the briefings you have received, that the military course of action is really the only one that can unstick the stalemate we seem to be in? Do you have any hope of diplomacy prevailing?
I actually don't believe that that's the case. I think we have numerous instruments of national power, whether it's our Treasury Department sanctions, it's trade tools we can use to apply pressure, diplomacy through us and our allies and partners, military action. Historically, the American people, through their government, have done a really good job of bringing to bear the powers that they have. I think there's a temptation to look to the military to solve all of the problems we have, and I think that is a dangerous temptation, and it will not lead to an optimal outcome.
So what about the temptation to throw even more money at the DoD? The president wants a $1.5 trillion defense budget. He is now suggesting some $350 billion should go through the reconciliation process, again, 3.0, to secure more funding for the Pentagon. Do you see a real chance of that happening?
I think I bring some credibility to this issue. The current law now requires the Pentagon to produce a auditable financial statement in the next couple of years. In modern history, they've been unable to do so, yet we continue to shovel money into the Pentagon. Until we have real visibility into where the money is spent and where the waste, fraud, and abuse is in the Pentagon, we can't be credible stewards of the American taxpayers' dollars. So I think that's the first step. But in the interim, I think the administration will need to ask some and answer some tough questions from members of Congress about where exactly the money will go. I will say the one agency that I think is notable where DOGE did not do a lot of activity is the Pentagon. That happens to be the largest discretionary program in our federal government, so I think it's ripe for scrutiny.
So reconciliation 3.0 with more Pentagon money, you would throw a little cold water on that idea?
Well, let's see how it's structured. I mean, it's a time of war. We, of course, need to refill our stockpiles to keep the American people safe and secure. I'm absolutely open to that, spending money on anti-air weapons and other hardware that the American people understand that we need. But let's not waste money. I would also say, if we're going to spend more money, let's think through how we can do so sustainably. We have a massive national debt. There hasn't been enough consideration of the implications of our spending in Washington in modern history, and so let's have that difficult conversation in conjunction with any debates about reconciliation.
And finally, Senator, we're asking everyone this question this week because the president seems very interested in the idea of the U.S. government having some ownership of the big AI companies. He suggests it could bring more wealth to the public. And I wonder if you think that's an attractive idea, if the government should be playing that kind of role in some of these very large companies that could soon be public.
Well, my emphasis is making sure we stay ahead of the Chinese, and the capital is deployed efficiently, that these companies are liberated to produce best-in-class models, because we know the Chinese are also sophisticated when it comes to such things. But we have our own system. And it involves, it's much more heavily emphatic that the private sector needs to lead as opposed to government. In terms of government ownership, the reservations I would have is that government would too strongly steer the direction of these companies in ways that meet the needs of special interests instead of customers. I do think there's a very important conversation to be had about data centers and energy costs and how those are spilled over onto consumers. I think those costs should be internalized by tech companies themselves rather than exported to the American people.
My conversation with Republican Senator Todd Young of Indiana earlier on Capitol Hill. Clearly, he has a bit of reservations about the idea of government ownership, Joe, of some of these large AI companies who either are planning to go public later on in the case of OpenAI or Anthropic, or literally on the cusp of going public tomorrow in the case of SpaceX. That pricing, of course, coming after the bell today.
Yeah, which was a fixed price, right?
Yeah.
Are we going to be surprised by that number?
We shouldn't be.
Okay.
Although I guess we continually hear how oversubscribed this IPO seems to be. So maybe it'll be a case of strange things happening. We know the market's waiting for it, and interestingly, as we wait for that, we've actually just seen the S&P 500 turn lower for a brief moment. So let's get a check on what's happening in these markets today as we turn back to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Kailey and Joe. Indeed, not a lot of conviction right now. As you correctly point out, the S&P 500 index did dip briefly into the red. Right now, little changed, up 2 points, keeping an eye on the swings there, up under 0.1%. Dow Industrials holding above 50K, up 226 now, up by about 0.5%. NASDAQ is up 0.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 0.6%. All of this with the stocks up 2.6%. That, of course, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index. The VIX right around 21. The 10-year 4.52%, with the 2-year 4.13%, and the 30-year 5.00%. Gold up $8 the ounce, $4,080, up by about 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.1%, little change, $90.21 a barrel. Brent just turning negative, down 0.2%. Barrel of Brent right now at $92.95. President Trump is vowing more attacks on Iran, threatening more energy assets, saying the U.S. will take Kharg Island. Again, West Texas Intermediate crude up now by 0.2%. Intel shares higher after Bank of America raised its recommendation on the stock to buy from underperform. Intel up now by about 3.9%. And sources tell Bloomberg retail investors bidding for shares in SpaceX's IPO have submitted orders for more than $100 billion. Pricing, of course, comes later today, trading tomorrow. The ticker, if you want to set it up in your screens, SPCX. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Joe and Kailey, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, watching the markets from New York. Thank you so much. Meantime, here in Washington, we're watching the Senate floor, where it does appear that, just like we saw in the House earlier this morning, an attempt to extend FISA Section 702 authority, warrantless surveillance powers that the administration argues are critical for national security. An extension effort is likely to go down on the Senate floor, just as it did in the other chamber. And after that, House members going home for an extended period of time. It's not clear when we can get a bipartisan agreement to actually see a FISA renewal, knowing President Trump does not seem to be backing down on having Bill Pulte serve as acting director of national intelligence.
You know, he's going to start the job on June 19th. Yeah. Reports today suggest that he called Tulsi Gabbard to tell her Tuesday that was her last day on the job. She said, no, I need to hear that from the White House. The president gave her an opportunity to pick a day, and that's what it is. The question is, who will follow? Are they going for unanimous consent here? Is that the plan in the Senate? So this could be a very similar result, to Kailey's point. And we're very lucky to have Patrick McHenry with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor. Of course, former Republican congressman from North Carolina, former chair, House Financial Services, former Speaker pro tem. Great to see you.
Great to be with you.
I bet you weren't surprised to see this fail in the House. Were you surprised to see 19 Republicans vote against it?
Oh, yes. That was a surprising number. But also, so stepping back, where are we in this moment?
Yeah.
Right? You have some harmful actions by the White House, both with the weaponization fund and with the Pulte nom, that have really made Capitol Hill's life really complicated and complex. In a parliamentary democracy, this is where governments fail and they go and have an election. But in our American system, we just flounder on until the next election. This governing coalition is cooked. And that's what we're seeing right now. So in the midst of war, one of our primary techniques to ensure that Americans remain safe is through the 702 authority and FISA, and we're going to let it expire to go dark. This is a crazy thing to happen and a very dangerous thing to happen, but that's where the majority is right now in Capitol Hill.
Well, you say we're cooked. Is it not President Trump who keeps turning up the temperature on the oven? Couldn't he have just said, you know what, I hear you on Bill Pulte, here's someone else that I'm nominating to serve in a permanent position?
Yes, that is true. Absolutely true. Same thing for the weaponization fund.
Sure.
And so we've had in the midst of in what was going to be complex anyway, right? The reopening of parts of Homeland Security got completely obscured by the fact that you had this fund in the Department of Justice, not even the operable agency they're debating. And so Capitol Hill's life has just been really hellacious this summer. And so right now they're struggling through what should be a reasonably easy vote, a short-term extension in order to actually have a discussion, real discussion. This should be in a normal frame, something we don't even talk about. It just happens and they go home for the weekend. But it shows you how extraordinary the moment is right now.
You sound almost like John Cornyn in an interview with the New York Times. I don't know if you saw this. It just published a short time ago. Talked about the self-serving decisions of the president in his insistence on slavish loyalty, ultimately setting himself up for a midterm disaster, Congressman, that would pave the way for, quote, the most miserable 2 years of his life, unquote. Does that sound about right?
Yes, that sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple things. The president's approval rating is not where, he's not meeting expectations on the economy. The American people's, our gas prices have a heavy emphasis on people's view of the economy. So all this stuff is a really negative, nasty mix for the party in power, and the party in power are my friends in the Republican Party.
Something that may help gas prices, or at least is helping lower oil prices right now, is we're seeing stocks shoot higher. We're now up about 1% on the S&P 500 as the president posts on Truth Social that he's canceled the scheduled strikes against Iran. Of course, we've seen this movie before, but the president writes on Truth Social, based on the fact that discussions with the Islamic Republic of Iran have been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved, I have, as the President of the United States of America, canceled the scheduled strikes and bombings against Iran this evening. Discussions and final points have been, in both concept and great detail, approved by all parties involved, including the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Pakistan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Egypt, and others. But, he says, Joe, the naval blockade will remain in full force and effect until the transaction is finalized.
WTI now down 3%, below $88 a barrel. S&P 500 up 1%, or 85 points. The Dow's up over 700 points now. We're just going to keep doing this?
What was the old newspaper adage? Important if true.
Okay.
Right? I mean, the major announcement, but we've seen significant announcements. We want to see that there's really beef between these patties, and we haven't really seen that yet. So substantial news. This could have a market impact on the economy, and would be sufficient time where you could see relief at the pumps by the fall, according to all the forecasters that you interview and we watch here on Bloomberg. Sure. This could be a favorable impact for where we sit in October before the midterm. Wow.
Well, I'm sure that's happy news for a lot of Republican lawmakers as they consider their own re-elections. Does this nullify further war powers attempts on Capitol Hill?
No, because the Congress
don't know if it's true.
Yes, and Congress still wants to have a say here. We've yet to see a supplemental take shape. We see those talks are continuing with the administration, and the president has a significant request for Department of Defense funding. So each day has an impact on the legislative impact and the funding impact for our war-making capacity.
We're going even further here with the president saying the time and place of the signing to be announced shortly. So we've got a deal.
Well, remember, he told our colleague Anne-Marie Hordern when traveling back from New York a few days ago that he actually did think a deal could be signed in 2 to 3 days.
Right.
Maybe he's meeting the timeline here.
We've heard that a lot of times, though, and Iran typically makes it seem like he's having his own conversation. This would be remarkable if true, to your point. If it's not, and we go back to the standoff, at what point does the president lose credibility in calling the ball here over and over again?
No, the president still has a massive control over the narrative here. Yeah. And the fact that the president's listed all those countries, all these important countries for a deal with Iran, quite meaningful, the price of oil. The list of countries here have the disproportionate say over that. This is a major piece of news, and I think it could be quickly verified once we see international reporting from these other countries.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see if that does indeed materialize. As we consider the notion of even when the conflict is over, the U.S. is obviously going to have to do a pretty major replenishment effort of our munitions stockpiles. How quickly would you expect the Pentagon to be able to turn over a figure for a supplemental request in terms of the funding they want for this conflict to be over?
If this news is true, this is the next most important question, which is where do we stand with our munitions and our capacity to replenish? We saw the announcement today that Patriot missiles, our allies, are asking when they will receive deliveries, and they don't yet know. And I think that is because we still have active action and use of these really complex weapon systems. I think we will see that within weeks. I think Congress will have to, I think you'll have to have a supplemental request to Congress by the month of July. I mean, we're weeks away, not months away from having an answer here. And then the question is whether or not they have account flexibility or whether or not that really needs to be done on an urgent basis.
Like through Reconciliation 3.0, as the president suggested?
Well, that would be the hope. But, if we're talking about replenishing these supplies, you might have the opportunity for a bipartisan cooperation there, maybe, if there's an end to hostilities. But that's the reason why this Reconciliation 3.0 conversation is really strategically important for our weapon systems, strategically important for our allies as well, on whether or not we can quickly get these accounts flush again so they can start making these orders at the Department of Defense.
The president says no games, no delays, no weak compromises. Do this ASAP. What he calls Recon 3.1. We're going to shorten this now. The only path to the full $1.5 trillion military budget our warriors need. He also says at the request of our great Department of War, it will include the Save America Act as well. Did he just kill that effort by attaching Save America once again?
Well, it failed before because of Senate rules that it cannot be included.
That's right.
This would be, to step back on that, the Democratic Party tried to end the filibuster to nationalize our election laws during the Biden administration. They tried on 2 attempts. Now we see a Republican effort on Capitol Hill to do the same thing, to nationalize our election laws. There's skepticism now in the Democratic Party. And so both parties have flipped positions on using reconciliation and nationalizing election laws just in a very quick period of time.
Life in the majority.
Life of our modern politics, right? The ability to flip on a switch just based off of the whims or really Trump has colored the whole era. So that's why both parties have flipped and done these contortions.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Chairman, always good to have
Great
you.
to be with you.
Former Congressman from North Carolina, Patrick McHenry, and of course a Bloomberg Politics contributor. Very lucky to have him with us as we deal with this breaking news. Again, President Trump has canceled the planned strikes on Iran tonight and says that final points on a deal with Iran have been approved by all parties. As a result, oil right now, session lows, stocks, session highs. So let's get an update on the figures as they stand as we turn back to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe and Kailey. Indeed, all of this breaking in the past 10 minutes. You guys broke the news. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all surging. Oil selling off big time. President Trump canceling planned strikes against Iran tonight. Trump says the time and place of an Iran deal signing will come soon. Right to the numbers here. Fast-moving markets. S&P up 80 to 73.46. That is a gain now of 1.1%. The Dow up 704, up 1.4%. To be sure, on the S&P, just about the best level of the day. Stocks taking off in a straight line. All of this coming down roughly 1:30 Wall Street time. NASDAQ now up 369, up 1.5%. The NASDAQ 100 index outperforming. Full of those big tech names. NASDAQ 100 up 2.2%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares also up by 2.1%. The SOX now up by 5%, with the VIX retreating to just above 20. Your 10-year 4.49%, the 2-year 4.09%, and the 30-year back below 5%, 4.97%. Crude, major story here. Last update, we told you crude was higher. Right now down 3.5% with an $80 handle, $87 even on WTI. Barrel of Brent, 89.80. 89.90 now, down by 3.4%. Repeating our top story, President Trump cancels planned strikes against Iran tonight. The president saying a time and place of an Iran deal signing will come shortly. Recapping, S&P up 1.1%. Keep it locked into Bloomberg Television and Radio for the latest developments. Joe and Kailey, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. The market clearly reacting fast and furious to the True Social post from President Trump. The cancellation of strikes tonight, the assertion that final points have been approved by all parties on a deal with Iran. But, Joe, I'm running through the list here of the countries named by President Trump. The United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Pakistan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Egypt, and others. Iran is not on that list. Does it fall into the others bucket?
I'm not sure. That's a great question. Maybe he thought that was implied or understood. But time and place of the signing to be announced shortly makes us feel like this is all but done, despite the cross currents that we've been hearing with regard to the rhetoric from the administration. Tyler Kendall covers the White House for us. Our Washington correspondent is with us right now in our Washington bureau. Tyler, what do we make of this, and could we in fact get news on a signing at some point here, as the president says?
Well, according to the president, it does appear that maybe this is imminent, though, of course, as you guys have been reporting, there's caution here until we actually see a finalized agreement. But Bloomberg News had reported earlier today that the diplomatic negotiations were ongoing and that we were seeing Qatar actually take a more meaningful role in those negotiations. We also had reporting that there was the first face-to-face meeting between senior national security officials from the UAE and Iran in a bid to calm ties there, since we know that the UAE has really been the target of a lot of retaliation. We still have big questions, though, on what this could entail. Before we saw this flare-up in fighting when it came to the ceasefire, we had been tracking that the U.S. was looking at agreeing to a memorandum of understanding that would seek to extend the ceasefire by 60 days, prioritize reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and lifting the U.S. naval blockade, which, according to this post, President Trump says isn't going anywhere until everybody signs on the dotted line. And then it's our understanding that this would take a phased approach where we would see curbs on Iran's nuclear program. So we are trying to glean any sort of details on what that may actually look like in practice.
It's just striking, Tyler, that the president suggests that we've now reached this point where a deal could be imminent, hours after suggesting in an interview on Fox News that the U.S. could very short and on True Social go in and seize Kharg Island.
So our own analysts have Bloomberg Economics have suggested that perhaps this has been escalation in a bid to de-escalate the conflict, maybe some negotiating leverage that we've seen the White House use before, because really this past week has marked the largest uptick in fighting since the ceasefire began. It started with the tit-for-tat strikes between Iran and Israel, President Trump getting personally involved in that diplomacy to get a ceasefire there. But then we saw the U.S. respond first in the wake of that American military helicopter being shot down earlier this week, and then overnight hitting dozens of Iranian military targets, and Iran retaliating again, hitting or trying to hit U.S. bases throughout the region. President Trump's threats that were different this time was because he had extended it to energy infrastructure, which we all know would be a major escalation.
Yeah. Kailey mentions the countries that are not listed, or the one. There's a country that is listed here right after the U.S., and that's Israel. Should we assume that this would apply as well to Israel and Hezbollah, which, of course, was a deal breaker for Iran with the ceasefire just days ago?
Right. That was dominating the conversation just days ago, because Iran repeatedly maintained that a ceasefire had to extend to Israel's front against the Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah. But Israel and the U.S. both have repeatedly said that this is a separate front. But we got indications that the White House was really eyeing this as a potential roadblock, considering that President Trump got on the phone directly with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A lot of reporting came out of how tense that call was. But even publicly, President Trump had said in that interview over the weekend with NBC News that he wants Israel to take a more, quote, surgical approach to how it is trying to achieve its military objectives related to Hezbollah. So perhaps it's rolled in, but we should also mention that while Iran wants to see this in the deal, before the conflict began, the U.S. was demanding that Iran's support for proxy militia groups needed to be in an agreement. We'll see if there's any sort of movement there, because we heard from the Houthi rebels earlier this week that they could take action in the Red Sea. So it's all connected.
All right. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, our Washington correspondent, running into the studio for us on this breaking news. Thank you so much. And for a bit more analysis now, we turn to Jonathan Panikoff, Atlantic Council Director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative. Jonathan, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you. And I wonder if you take this post from the president at face value. Do you really believe we could see a deal between the U.S. and Iran signed soon?
Well, great to be with you. Look, I certainly hope so. I think we've had a little bit of whiplash here, all of us, frankly. The reality is we've seen posts that are similar to this before. I think the way that it's framed, I think, is giving reason for optimism that probably is a bit more than most of us have had in the past. The fact that he called out the countries, the fact that he said it'll be very soon, there's some details and specificity here that we haven't seen. So look, do I think it's possible? I absolutely do. I also think, look, there is a not insignificant chance that the president is pushing for something that maybe the Iranians haven't even fully signed off on, or that he's trying to push them or coerce them into a corner in hopes that they will go along with it in the end. So I'm not ready to say it's quite done yet, but it's certainly reason for optimism.
Interesting. Jonathan, we think of you as an expert on the proxies. How important will it be for Hezbollah and for the Houthis to accept this? They're obviously not going to be at the negotiating table.
Yeah, that's right. Look, on the Houthi side, this entire war, I think one of the big questions has been why have the Houthis not gotten more involved? There's been significant conversations about the fact that they really have their own political agenda in Yemen, and this would have undermined it in some ways. The fact that the Saudis and the Houthis may have some agreements behind the scenes. I think the Houthis will be a little easier here, frankly, at least in the near term. Hezbollah is the really big question, and frankly, from that perspective, therefore, so is Israel. We know the Israelis have been unhappy with the deal of this contour simply because it was always supposed to seemingly relate to a ceasefire and the opening of the strait, and then maybe dealing with the nuclear program in a 60-day window, which almost have to be elongated. But if the ballistic missiles aren't dealt with, and Israel feels like it's going to be under threat because it's still a threat from Hezbollah for ballistic missiles, or it feels like the Hezbollah's activities, and especially if Iran starts to resupply Hezbollah in the future, Hezbollah constant attacks on the Israeli border, we already have seen that Israel is not always willing to listen when it comes to attacks on its border from President Trump trying to stop them. Israel went forward last week with a strike, obviously, that had repercussions. I think it's going to be an open question. I think it's a real question about where the proxies play into all of this.
Well, yeah, that certainly is one of the many questions that come to mind at this moment, Jonathan. But another one is did the U.S. going back to the military option actually work if it just unlocked potentially all parties agreeing to a deal? Was that Apache helicopter going down and the subsequent retaliatory strikes that the U.S. Conducted proof that the U.S. wasn't necessarily bluffing?
I think it certainly demonstrated that the U.S. wasn't bluffing. I do think that part is true. I think there's still a quite open question, though, of whether or not Iran actually cares all that much. The one thing we know is that Iran is willing to sacrifice an awful lot. Its economy, its people, its tolerance for pain and its threshold for pain is significantly higher than traditionally we've had in the U.S., and that I think the U.S. is willing to support at this point, given if you look at where polling is, for example, on support of President Trump and this war. At the same time, clearly even the threats today were about being coercive, and coercive military strikes, not intended to bring us back potentially, if they had happened, to a full-scale war or what we saw through the March, but really about being strategic to try and keep upping the ante. I think clearly they've had some effect. I want to be clear that it's unlikely that it was the sole reason for Iran's decision to engage now. We know negotiations have been going on behind the scenes for quite a while, and I think it's probably a little bit of combination of both, frankly.
What do you think has happened since we all got up today here, Jonathan? We started the morning with great concern that we were about to go attack Iran and hit him even harder, as the president said, seize Kharg Island, of course. By lunchtime, we're talking about a place and time to sign a peace deal. How did this come together, if you take the president at his words, in 5 hours when it didn't seem to work over the course of 5 weeks?
Yeah, my guess is I wouldn't look at it in a 5-hour time period. I think actually the weeks is more important. I think this is really a reflection of the fact that the negotiations were going on even as you had U.S. strikes, even as you had Iranian retaliation over the last week or so. You still had the negotiations.
I guess the question, though, is, was there a phone call this morning? Was there an exchange of messages, or is the president projecting?
No, I've got no doubt that there was some sort of engagement and exchange. I don't know that whether it was direct or indirect. The Qataris have been playing an additional role. Obviously, the Pakistanis were still trying. I've got no doubt that there was a flurry of messages that have gone back and forth. But I also think those messages would have fallen, frankly, on deaf ears if the preparatory work hadn't been done over the last week or 2 weeks. And so I think you got to combine both of those to really understand how we probably got here today. But I've got no doubt Bloomberg will soon have a TikTok on it from your great reporting.
Oh, yeah, you can bet that our reporters are already hard at work trying to unearth what exactly happened here. Also, who exactly this deal was struck with? It's one thing for the two sides to be understood to be talking, but does it not matter who is actually doing the negotiating on the Iranian side? The president, Jonathan, says that this has been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved. Should we understand that to mean Mojtaba Khamenei, or is that IRGC leadership? How do we know that the leadership that approved this is one that's going to stand by it?
Yeah, it's a reflection of the fact that there's a bit of a void and a black hole when it comes to understanding how Iranian leadership decisions are being made fundamentally right now in Tehran. Look, the highest level would seem to indicate that includes Mojtaba, and the supreme leader. But really what you're talking about right now, from everything I've heard and from people I've talked to, is that you really have a group of between kind of 6 and 8 people who are really leading in Tehran and who are coalescing and coordinating together to make decisions. It includes people like General McHenry, the head of the guards. It includes people like Speaker Kalibaf from the Majlis, a couple of others, the new national security advisors in that group. And so you would hope that it means all of them have come together and agreed. And this is the problem. If it turns out it's only one of them or 2 of them, Kalibaf has been the key interlocutor and negotiator between the U.S. And with the Pakistanis, then that will become a challenge. From the wording of the president's post, look, it would assume that it means Mojtaba, and that means the rest of them would have gotten together to sign off on it as well. I think time will tell, but it'll be pretty quick that we have a sense of whether this is real or not.
Okay, so let's say best case scenario, it is real. They meet somewhere. There's a signing ceremony. Iran knows, though, that it has leverage now that it may not have ever known before. How do you maintain an agreement like this, particularly when it comes to keeping the Strait open?
I think one question is, what is the actual agreement? So the fundamental problem is, look, if this really is just the MOU to open the Strait and then end the blockade, which is what seems to be implied, then you got a long way to go on all of the other key issues, right? The Strait and the closure of the Strait was not a problem that existed, frankly, before the conflict. There's 2 opportunities or possibilities, I should say. One is, look, the Europeans, the French, the Brits, have been leading a maritime effort to get together a group of like-minded countries to have some sort of force along the Strait. There's questions about whether or not the Iranians will accept that, but that could be one way in the most immediate term that I know, having just been in Paris and speaking to French officials, can be deployed almost immediately once there's a ceasefire. The second part of this, though, is, look, you're probably going to have to keep a U.S. carrier group in the Gulf for some time. And this is going to be about a long-term threat proposition that if Iran threatens to close the Strait again, or if they actually do use drones, for instance, to try to close the Strait again and attack ships, then the U.S. is also in position, even independently of this broader force, to actually take action. And so you're going to need to maintain that sort of presence, which frankly is something I think President Trump has really not wanted to do if you look at the course of his rhetoric earlier in the term.
Well, and that's also why he's called on other allies of the United States who are more reliant on the energy flowing out of the Strait of Hormuz to step up. Europe has seemed to suggest that once there was a resolution to the conflict, then they'd be willing to get together this coalition of the willing to help keep the Strait open. But you're suggesting the U.S. is still going to have to be involved, Jonathan.
Yeah, look, I think the coalition of the willing absolutely can come in, and it can come in quite quickly. I'm confident of that. But I think that it's going to be very, very hard for the U.S. to say at that point, but we're just going to fully withdraw from the region. It's going to be delicate. And there's also a coercive nature here. Look, the nuclear program is still going to be unresolved. Issues related to ballistic missiles are still unresolved. Questions related to Iranian proxy networks are still going to be unresolved. In other words, if we're going to continue the negotiation, I think you'd want to keep that leverage, and you'd want to have it to ensure that European allies weren't alone in case something does go wrong.
Really glad you could join us, Jonathan. Welcome back. Atlantic Council Director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative. Jonathan Panikoff with us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz, and we've watched this story evolve dramatically over the course of the program, and the markets follow. Really something to see the Dow up over 700 points. We were up over 800, Kailey. The S&P 500 up 87. The NASDAQ is now up 400 points. It's a 1.5% gain for the Dow and the NASDAQ. Interest rates are lower, and oil prices are too.
Yeah, substantially so for oil. We're down more than 3% on both Brent and WTI. WTI right now about $87 a barrel. Clearly a market that is looking forward to hopefully an opening of the Strait of Hormuz. But interestingly, as we see these oil prices going down, and as you mentioned, rates going lower, we've actually seen the market price out a full Fed hike.
How about that?
This year. There was this notion that the Fed might have to do what the ECB did earlier today and actually tighten policy in the face of energy-driven inflationary risks. But perhaps if this deal is indeed finalized, that may not ultimately be the case. But it is still an if at this hour, Joe. Right now, we're only hearing from President Trump on this. We have yet to hear from Iran. You
got a 10-year below 4.5, a 30-year below 5 now, and a 2-year at 4.07. All three are trending lower on this news. There's going to be a lot more where this came from on Bloomberg Business Week Daily. That starts just a couple of moments, and on the late edition of Balance of Power. It starts right here at 5 p.m. Eastern.
We'll see you then. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu on Bloomberg TV and radio.